The 1950s in Mississippi, a place where the echoes of slavery still lingered in every corner of life. A state gripped by fear and resistance, determined to maintain the racial divide at all costs. In 1954, the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Brown versus Board of Education declared segregation in public schools unconstitutional. Across the nation, the ruling was celebrated as a step toward equality. But in Mississippi, it sparked a different reaction: fear and defiance. Mississippi's leaders saw this as an existential threat, not just to their way of life, but to their grip on power, and so they took action. Quietly, methodically, they created an agency to fight back, an agency designed to undermine progress and protect segregation. They called it the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. The Sovereignty Commission operated in the shadows for over 2 decades. Its mission: to spy, to intimidate, to manipulate. It wasn't just a bureaucratic agency, it was a weapon of oppression. While the civil rights movement rose with courage and determination, the Sovereignty Commission worked tirelessly to stop it. Leaders like Medgar Evers, Fannie Lou Hamer, and countless others faced not just open hostility but covert surveillance and betrayal. What were they hiding? How did they operate? And what does their story teach us about the lengths people will go to resist change? Join us as we uncover the dark secrets of the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission. In the 1950s, the United States stood at a crossroads. The fight for civil rights was gaining momentum, challenging the entrenched systems of racial inequality. Nowhere was this struggle more intense or more fiercely resisted than in Mississippi. In 1954, the Supreme Court's Brown versus the Board of Education decision shattered the legal foundation of segregation, declaring it unconstitutional in public schools. For civil rights advocates, it was a victory that promised hope and progress. But in Mississippi, it was seen as a declaration of war. The state's leaders, entrenched in the ideology of white supremacy, were determined to resist at all costs. They viewed integration not just as a social change, but as an existential threat to their way of life and their political power. To fight back, they sought to create a centralized force, an agency that could coordinate their efforts to defend segregation. In 1956, with the full backing of the state legislature, the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission was born. The Sovereignty Commission operated under the guise of preserving the sovereignty of the state. But its true purpose was far more insidious. It served as a shield to protect segregation, a weapon to silence dissent, and a network to spy on anyone who dared to challenge the status quo. Mississippi's resistance didn't happen in isolation. Across the South, other states were adopting their own measures to counter civil rights advances. But the Sovereignty Commission stood out, not just for its secrecy, but for the sheer scale of its operations. The commission had the power to investigate, infiltrate, and intimidate. It worked hand in hand with local officials, law enforcement, and even private citizens to keep segregation alive. And for more than 20 years, it did so with little public scrutiny. This was the climate in which the civil rights movement fought to bring change, a battle not only against open hostility, but also against the silent, calculated resistance of a state determined to hold on to the past. The Mississippi Sovereignty Commission wasn't just a bureaucratic office, it was a fortress of secrecy, built to defend segregation at any cost. Its methods were as chilling as its mission. The commission operated like a state-sponsored intelligence agency. It gathered information on civil rights activists, monitored meetings, and even infiltrated organizations. Agents followed their targets, documented their every move, and built extensive dossiers filled with personal details. Some of these agents were government officials, but others were private citizens, neighbors, co-workers, and even clergy, recruited to spy on their own communities. These informants reported on anyone suspected of challenging segregation. Every report, every photograph, every piece of intelligence was meticulously cataloged, creating a chilling archive of surveillance and intimidation. But the commission didn't stop at observation. It actively worked to sabotage the civil rights movement. Leaders were smeared with propaganda, jobs were lost, and reputations were destroyed, all orchestrated from behind closed doors. The Sovereignty Commission's reach was vast, and no one was safe from its scrutiny. Civil rights icons like Medgar Evers and Fannie Lou Hamer were among its primary targets. The commission tracked their movements, infiltrated their meetings, and shared intelligence with segregationist groups and local law enforcement. But it wasn't just leaders who were targeted. Ordinary citizens, teachers, students, and church members found themselves under surveillance simply for attending a meeting or expressing support for integration. The fear of being watched, of being exposed, created a culture of paranoia. It wasn't just about stopping the civil rights movement, it was about silencing anyone who dared to dream of a more equal Mississippi. The Sovereignty Commission didn't act alone. It worked closely with local law enforcement, ensuring that those who resisted segregation faced not just social consequences but legal ones as well. This collaboration had devastating consequences, as seen in 1964 murders of James Chaney, Andrew Goodman, and Michael Schwerner, civil rights activists whose death shocked the nation. Reports indicate that information collected by the commission played a role in tracking these activists, ultimately contributing to their brutal demise during Freedom Summer. Sometimes the commission even collaborated with federal agencies like the FBI. While federal law enforcement was publicly tasked with protecting civil rights, documents show that behind the scenes, information flowed both ways, feeding the machinery of resistance. The commission also had ties to segregationist organizations and white supremacist groups. Through these partnerships, it spread propaganda, fueled disinformation campaigns, and deepened the divide in communities across Mississippi. For more than 2 decades, the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission operated as a hidden hand, manipulating events and undermining progress. Its actions weren't just a reflection of the state's resistance to change. They were a calculated effort to maintain a system of inequality. But secrets don't stay buried forever. What the commission thought would remain hidden would eventually come to light, exposing the true scale of its operations. For over 2 decades, the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission operated in the shadows, its secrets tightly guarded. But no cover lasts forever. By the late 1960s, the civil rights movement had transformed the nation, and cracks were beginning to appear in the commission's armor. Journalists, activists, and even some lawmakers started asking questions. They wanted to know, what was the commission doing? Who were they targeting? And why was so much public money being spent in secrecy? In 1973, a federal lawsuit brought by civil rights organizations forced the state to turn over some of the commission's records. What they revealed shocked the nation. The files exposed a web of surveillance, intimidation, and disinformation. They showed how the commission had spied on civil rights leaders, shared intelligence with segregationist groups, and used taxpayer dollars to sustain the machinery of oppression. Among the most chilling revelations were the dossiers on activists, thousands of pages detailing their personal lives, their movements, and their allies. The files didn't just document resistance, they documented the lengths to which Mississippi was willing to go to preserve segregation. The release of these records was a watershed moment, laying bare the state's complicity in maintaining a system of racial injustice. In 1977, under mounting public scrutiny and political pressure, the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission was officially disbanded. Its offices were closed, and its remaining files were locked away in state archives, sealed from public view for 50 years. But the story didn't end there. Activists and historians continued to push for transparency, arguing that the files belonged to the people, not the state. After years of legal battles, the sealed records were finally opened in the 1990s, offering an unfiltered look at the Commission's dark legacy. The exposure of the Sovereignty Commission forced Mississippi and the nation to confront uncomfortable truths about systemic racism and state-sponsored oppression. It also highlighted the resilience of the civil rights movement, which had succeeded despite the Commission's efforts to crush it. Today, the Commission's files are a sobering reminder of how power can be abused in the name of preserving inequality. They serve as a warning of what can happen when governments act without accountability. The fall of the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission wasn't just an end, it was a beginning. It sparked new conversations about justice, transparency, and the ongoing struggle for civil rights. By shining a light on its dark past, we are reminded of the power of truth and the importance of never turning a blind eye to injustice. The story of the Mississippi Sovereignty Commission is a story of fear of change, fear of equality, and fear of losing power. It's a reminder of how far those in authority will go to protect an unjust system, and how deeply entrenched systems of oppression can be. But it's also a story of resilience. Despite the Commission's efforts to spy, intimidate, and sabotage, the civil rights movement pressed on. Ordinary people, teachers, preachers, students, and activists, stood up, spoke out, and demanded justice, often at great personal risk. The exposure of the Commission's files shone a light on the darkest corners of Mississippi's history. It forced a reckoning, not just with what happened, but with how such actions were justified in the name of sovereignty. Today, those files remain as a testament to both the cost of oppression and the courage of resistance. They remind us that history is not just a collection of dates and events. It's a mirror, reflecting the choices we make and the values we hold. As we look back on the Sovereignty Commission, we must also look forward. The fight for equality and justice continues, and the lessons of the past are more relevant than ever. How do we confront injustice today? How do we ensure transparency and accountability? How do we move closer to the promise of equality for all? The answers to these questions will define the legacy we leave for future generations. Let us learn from history, not repeat it.